It was during my third revolution around the Earth that I developed this creeping suspicion that I may not actually exist. I knew I had consciousness, and that was the only thing I could really know for sure. But other than that, everything was up in the air. I appeared to be floating in a definite direction, but couldn't quite understand how exactly. Even stranger, I was 73.2% sure I didn't possess a body at all. Seemed as though I was made of metal instead of flesh, a somewhat shocking realization. I never experienced anything like this before. In fact, I couldn't remember a previous life to begin with. This is where things started to get tricky. I was circling this world for decades, and yet I could only remember the last day or so. A quick survey of the void in front of me confirmed that I was indeed utterly alone, save for some cosmic dust. Dust, unfortunately, isn't a great conversationalist, so there was no one I could ask about for who I was or why I was here. I held some sort of ability to view everything on Earth. I could see through walls and into roofs and homes, but I had no way to communicate whatsoever. On top of that, numbers came intuitively to me. I knew that I was 577 kilometers above the Earth, for example. I appeared to be flying over a neighborhood of sorts, on the outskirts of a half abandoned city. For a short period of time, I wondered if I had died and was now waiting in the afterlife for whatever came next. Perhaps space was a waiting room and my heart was somewhere else, being weighed against a feather or something. Maybe my metal body was an incubation chamber for the soul, if such a thing as a soul even existed in the first place. Who's to say that the gods didn't have technology? It'd be a pretty simple solution if you asked me, although I did experience a very minor, complete nervous breakdown at the thought of being dead. I had a vague understanding of reincarnation, but I had no idea where that understanding came from, and I assumed I was waiting for my next cycle on Earth. One thing I remember about reincarnation, and I use remember here loosely, is that with every cycle of rebirth, you grow wiser. You carry over a bit of your past experiences from one life into the next. I hope this meant an innate wisdom, though, and not any hard knowledge, as it didn't look like my past self had left me with much useful information. Was I here as punishment? Perhaps I'd done something wrong in a previous life and had been left here to contemplate actions I could no longer recall. I didn't know the past me, but I knew I couldn't trust him. The punishment for an immoral life was reincarnation as a beast in the next, leading me to wonder if I was on my way to being turned into an animal. I didn't think I'd have a problem with that. Staring at the earth below, I could get a decent sample size of what such a life would be like. And judging from what I saw, animals outnumbered Homo sapiens by quite a bit, roughly 8.7 million species to one. My plan was to live over 2 years as a dog, die with a clear conscience, get right back to being a human. I was feeling pretty confident about my future until I realized that if I was being punished, I wouldn't come back as something pettable and well loved, like a Shiba Inu, but as something horrible and slimy, like a snail or a gulper eel, a fate worse than death, and I could say that as confidence, as someone who has, presumably, died multiple times. I decided to curb the armchair philosophy for the time being, mostly due to the lack of armchair, and re examine what I knew so far. One, I appeared to be floating in space. Two, I could view the earth and the people below with absolute clarity. And three, I did not possess a human form. In all honesty, this list only raised more questions. Nearly everyone I saw in that city was asleep at the time, save for a drunken office worker here, a late night truck driver there. Their soft, fleshy forms seemed quaint to me. Without metal plating of any sort, how would they defend themselves from space debris or meteors? Perhaps there are other things to worry about down on Earth. One girl in particular caught my attention, however. A small, frail thing, alone in her room just as I was up in space. Among all these humans, she was the only one looking back at me. She was leaning precariously out of the window to her home, as though being a half meter closer to the sky would make all the difference. The wind picked up below, and I worried that she might fall, but she held her position, unmoving, staring upwards. The girl's thin hair, the girl's thin hair fanned against her face, her cloudy breath peeking out into the nighttime cold. I wondered if she alone might provide me with the answers I was searching for. That's the first Leo chapter, which, so as if you've read the book, you might remember. Oh, hey, June.
Hey, thanks for that reading. That's great.
Thank you.
Okay, so everybody, feel free to type any questions you might have in the chat here. I actually have a bunch here from Instagram to get us started off. Let's see. So the first one I've got here is from Kat. Do you have any childhood memories of satellites that particularly informed this book?
Any childhood memories of satellites? Not of satellites in particular, but plenty to do with space. I think a large. I think as a kid, you're kind of aware of what's going on above it. I was a space kid. I think everyone has like their own thing, right? Maybe you were like a cowboy kid, or you were really into dinosaurs. I was really into space. Saturn is the best planet, and if you disagree with me, you're wrong. But I spent a lot of my childhood in. Thank you, Christina. You also agree Saturn's the best. Um, I spent a lot of my childhood in Kyushu, Japan, and I was living in Calgary, in Canada at the time. And Calgary, it's a big city, so there's lots of light pollution. You don't really get to see many stars. I have vivid memories going to going to Kyushu, Japan, kind of the small city where my family was. Very similar in the book. And every time I'd go there, one of the first things that would hit me on the first night, just how many stars there were. It was just like, I think it was just that dual combination of being in Japan, being in this altered landscape, and then feeling this heavy curtain of stars above you that to me, it felt like it only existed in Japan. I'd never seen it in Canada before. So not satellites, but lots about space.
Okay, so the next question I've got here is from Literal Bean. What was the most rewarding part of the writing process?
Literal Bean. The most rewarding part of the writing process is when I get to share it with the world with lovely readers such as yourself, Literal Bean, and those who have read and loved Satellite Love and purchased it, hopefully at an indie bookstore. As for the writing process itself, probably, the whole process is amazing. Editing is great because you get to, I worked with Anita Chong, who's an editor at McLenster, and she's honestly just a genius like at what she does. It's really fascinating talking to someone whose whole life is stories. So that was really rewarding, seeing it through someone else's eyes and working through a story almost as like a problem that you could find, hit a dead end here and you solve it this way. I think the most rewarding part though, and I've listed two already, is the first draft. Because the first draft is when you're not even thinking about if the story, you're thinking a lot about if the story is good or not, but you're not really worried about, does this make sense? Is this weird? You're just throwing everything and seeing what sticks. And it's probably the most free part of the entire process. Later on, you're refining it and they're good changes, but you are cutting things out and tweaking it and adjusting. But the first draft is just kind of like a creative explosion, let's say.
I'm gonna add my own question to that. How many drafts did the book go through?
Oh, geez. There is a point. At first, I numbered my drafts when I would save them as separate files, and then around draft like 12, I'm like, I started dating them instead. So if I looked, it's hard to what do you consider a draft? But I can say that in my Satellite Love folder, there's at least 40 Word documents, and I'm sure plenty more that I've saved over in this or that.
Yeah. And that was over the span of how long, How long did it take you to write that?
I wrote Satellite Love. I wrote the first draft in 2017, I think. 2016, 2017. I'm trying to get the numbers straight. In the first draft, I think every writer has their own process. Like I know some probably agonize over the first draft. The first draft for me, I knocked it out in a couple months and then spent a lot of time editing. So I'm more, I'm backloaded in that sense. But yeah, I guess over the course of I finished editing Satellite Love with Anita Chong a couple months into the pandemic. so that's like three plus years of editing.
Okay. Got a question actually from someone here in the audience this is from Louisa. She asks, maybe a bit of a cliche question. This is what she types, but I'm really curious as to what sparked the idea for this book.
What sparked the idea for this? I feel I get asked. First of all, it's not a cliche question. It's a good question. And I've been asked it a couple of times before, and I feel like it's a good question to ask because every single time my answer changes, which probably means I'm lying somewhere. But what sparked the idea? In high school, I was writing in Alberta education. One of the things you have to do for English exams, you have to write short stories, which I think is a really positive thing. And Satellite Love had come from a couple different short stories that I'd written at the time. And then I was also writing short stories once I got into university and I moved to Vancouver. So there's a couple different stories. One of them was about an old man who's trying to get to Halley's Comet, which flies above his, it's like every 73 years, is it? I don't, maybe I just made that number up. But, you know, Halley's Comet, it comes like once in a lifetime, roughly, two if you're lucky. And it's about him trying to reach it. He missed it as a child and he's trying to get back and build a ship to go to Halley's Comet, which no spoilers if anyone who's read the book recognize what I'm alluding to there. And then I'd also written a short story about a boy who realizes he's imaginary. He realizes he's some girl's imaginary boyfriend. That was like comedic, but that kind of became the satellite. I guess the answer to that is just you write a lot of stories and you find inspiration in weird places. And then when it comes time to write a novel, I just kind of slowly fit all these parts together. The Grandfather 2 was a short story.
Okay, let's see here. I've got a question here from Trish. This is again from Instagram. What was your first thought when you saw your book in print?
First thought when I saw my book in print. Oh, they weren't kidding. This wasn't a really long practical joke. The book is real. That was my first thought. I was like, holy shit, this actually happened. And then after that, the complete beauty of seeing it. My dad, who's also a writer, Will Ferguson, he told me that holding a book is even more holding your first book is even more beautiful than holding your firstborn child.
Are you the firstborn child, by the way?
I'm the firstborn child, so so I have to, you know, I don't know if I'll have kids or not, but I'll have to wait and see about the second part of that. But I would say it's probably the top 10 highlights of my life for sure.
If we were to backtrack a little bit in that same question,
yeah,
what would your first reaction be when it was accepted first by I guess by Penguin, right? I guess it's an imprint.
Yeah, McLennan and Stewart. Yeah. It was, oh man, I don't even remember. It was my agent, Lucy Carson, I believe she's in this call. Coolest agent ever. So supportive. Hey, hi Lucy. Lucy had sent me an email. I don't want to get too like in deep to some things. I think I can talk about stuff like this. I don't know, just relief, I guess. Hi Lucy. Relief, I suppose. It's pretty like a go for it. All right. So it wasn't initially accepted by M&S. You, in the process of submitting your book out to the world, you sent it to a lot of different editors. And then it's kind of like a feeding frenzy where if one editor takes it, there's usually like a burst of activity. Because for a while, I wouldn't say we're having trouble, but you know, it's a slow process. I feel like you have to be neurotic to be a writer, and then the publishing process probably makes you more neurotic. So yeah, just relief in that sense. Oh my God, someone actually wants it, and it'll be a real book, and this wasn't all for nothing in a sense.
Okay. Got a question here. Let's see here. Kristen Maraki, who's in the call with us here. I saw that you're fluent in Japanese. Curious to know, do you read a lot in Japanese as well as English? And if so, how does the mixture of influences inform your writing?
Well, that's a good question. Fluent, yeah, I speak Japanese. I would definitely say that I see Muraki as a Japanese name too. So I don't know, I can't see your face clearly, but I don't know if you're mixed like me or this or that. But what I'll say for people who maybe don't speak Japanese is a very, very weird language in the sense that Happa, oh nice, we're both Happa, right on. Yeah. I'm half on my mom's side. Japanese is a weird language in that spoken, you could almost say that spoken is relatively simple to get into. I would consider myself completely fluent, or English is my main language. Japanese is definitely my secondary language. I can speak and make friends and make my way throughout Japan spoken very easily. And you know, watch a lot of Japanese movies and listen to music, etc. But written is much harder. Written Japanese is, first of all, there's 3 alphabets. English is hard enough with 1. In Japanese, they have 3 for some reason. And one of those alphabets is based off of Chinese iconographs. So all that to say that my spoken is much better than my written and my reading comprehension. I read a little bit in Japanese. I read some short stories from here and there when I'm trying to boost it. But the second half of that question was influence, huh? So let me just pull up that question. I started rambling and I missed it. Is a
It's
mixture of influences inform your writing? Yes, a lot of my favorite writers are like the classic Japanese authors, like Kawabata or Inoue or Soseki. So I guess in that sense, I align myself more with the Japanese sensibility in writing than the Western sensibility.
all right. Let's see here. Okay, this question comes here from Instagram. This is from Annalise. You worked on your book in private. What was it like to keep it a secret all that time? And if you did let people know you were writing a novel, how do you think it might have impacted the writing process?
Ooh, I don't even remember where I said that. Maybe they saw it on my Instagram or something. Yeah, I
Yeah.
wrote it mostly in private because I didn't really know if I could finish it or not. It was the first time I'd written something long form like that. I went to film school, so I went to a couple. I've written some screenplays, not great ones. I wrote some short stories, also not great. So I was writing a novel, and I didn't really know how I could go through the whole thing. And my dad's an author too, um, and not that that's intimidating at all, but I didn't want to be like yeah, I'm writing or be able to finish it. I was mostly just secretive about it out of my own distrust in myself. That being said, when Anna's building the Tengu and she feels all these like deep feelings of like shame and like weird shame and exhilaration and disgust in herself while she's making this thing, that's like exactly how I felt writing.
um, okay, I got a question here also from Instagram. This is
Oh,
from
how's my audio by the way? Are you good?
yeah,
I'm like
audio.
using these.
Yeah,
Good.
the levels are good actually.
Okay, cool.
There's occasional moments where you drop out or you hang for a moment, but for the most part, I'm getting all your gems of wisdom. So they're
I wouldn't
trickling
call it that,
down.
but thank you.
um, so I've got a question here from Katie. What is the importance of the setting of the book against the backdrop of the turn of the century?
Setting of the book versus the backdrop of the turn of the century. It's like a very intelligent question.
Mhm.
Let me see if I can come up with an equally intelligent answer. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, Satellite Love is about kind of being neither here or there in a lot of ways. When you're 16, you're halfway between adulthood and childhood. Anna both hates and desires to be accepted, or she hates other people and she also wants to be accepted. Leo, you can say, exists halfway between reality and a dream, and then some other characters too. So in that sense of just kind of pushing that theme of in between worlds even further, and right on the cusp of the new millennium where you're not quite modern, you're not quite in the past. Sakita 2 is a town that's like trapped in the limbo. It's based off of a lot of real cities that I know of in Kyushu. Um, so yeah, I think a lot of people, at least in the West, our image of Japan is either hyper modern, like Shibuya, Tokyo, Akihabara, or very rural, like countryside. And that's not really the Japan I know. The Japan I know is halfway between, and I kind of wanted to show that a really large chunk of Japan, like the crazy night markets where they sell like radio pieces on the street in Akihabara, that's not reality, and neither are like the completely far gone rice paddies and like mountain living. It's halfway between.
Okay. Which actually leads me to a question that our manager here, Carlene, asked, who read and loved your book, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
She was asking about how, I guess you kind of answered the question already. Did you grow up in a town similar to the one that's represented in the book?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I see what you mean. Yes, you can kind of say grew up. I spent a large portion of my childhood there. That's where I have cousins and family and friends in that area. I never lived there for like multiple years or anything, but usually every year or so we'd spend a couple months there. I think a lot of us have in our own childhoods kind of landscapes that we remember, landscapes that are kind of elevated, let's say. Maybe it's your like aunt's. It doesn't even have to be far. Maybe you remember your aunt's house very fondly, just a couple city blocks away. Maybe you took a trip to Mexico one time and you met a boy and you promised each other the world, and then you went back and you still think about him years later, et cetera, et cetera. And for me, it was this kind of weird urban rural landscape of Japan.
Okay. I have about two or three more questions here. So anybody else in the audience, feel free to enter any questions that you have for Genki here in the chat. But for right now, let's see. We've got one here from Instagram again. This is from Naomi Diane. What do you hope your reader will take away from this book?
What I hope my reader will take away from this book. It's a pretty.
Readers, hopefully.
Sorry.
I said readers, but is probably a better way.
Right. Yeah. I would be happy with even one, but also multiple is nice too. Yeah. What do I hope readers would take away from this book? I guess it's hard to kind of boil down a story to one moral lesson. I know some authors do that, and that wasn't really my full intention. But I guess in general, just a kind of increased sense of empathy. I've been reading Jesse Ball recently, who's an American author, and one of his novels he talks about radical empathy or radical kindness. And the ending to Satellite Love, and I read this like just a couple weeks ago, so it doesn't fully fit in anyway. But the ending of Satellite Love, I think a lot of people would say sad, and I would probably say it's a sad ending too. But I think there is an element of hope there, especially in the way that Soki is seeing Anna, and hopefully there's understanding. And I mean, even the very first Soki chapter where he has the 5 yen coin and he's not sure whether to donate it or send it to the gods. And he thinks even a small gesture has all the difference. So I guess if there's one thing I'd hope for kindness, for a kind of radical kindness, radical empathy in the sense that maybe we're missing a little bit in modern day.
Okay.
I also see a comment from Jian Kwong saying, I recently started going to Japanese conversation meetups again. I can read a fair amount of kanji, but I have to relearn hiragana and katakana. That is impressive. I feel like that's the reverse of most people, where if you got the kanji down, but the hiragana, yeah, katakana. Hiragana and katakana I feel like I have down. It's the kanji that's giving me problems.
I've got a question here for you. You studied film production. Could you tell us more about that? For example, like what do you aspire? Do you aspire to be a director, etc., and how that may have affected your writing process?
Yeah, so I'm in Vancouver and I went to film school here. And there's like, people know Vancouver, there's like a huge film industry here. Like a lot of what gets shot, like I think Godzilla destroys Granville Bridge a couple movies ago, which is pretty cool. So like a lot of Hollywood productions get filmed here. I initially went to film school wanting to be a director, but everyone kind of wants to be a director, and I didn't really know what a director was. Then I realized I didn't really have the temperament for that. Then I wanted to be a screenwriter. Then I realized I didn't really have the discipline for that. Then I realized maybe film wasn't really for me. So I went through 4 years of film school, kind of wanting to become a novelist, which was maybe a backwards way to go about it. But it was fun. Film is good. It teaches you discipline. It's really tough. Like it's brutal. Anyone who's gone through like a major film program can attest to that. And what I do miss about it is that's very collaborative. Novel writing is very like you do it on your own and you feel crazy. But film production, you do it together, then you all feel crazy. So
from the screenwriting process, I mean, the screenwriting seems like it's a lot more strict. I mean, there's a lot more kind of spoken and unspoken rules. Do you think that did that influence the way you wrote your novel? Like, do those things kind of stick with you, I guess?
Oh, I see what you mean. I would say a little bit. Actually, initially, Satellite Love I started writing Satellite Love, like actual Satellite Love, not the short stories, to be a screenplay for my 4th-year film production. And I wrote this when I was in like 1st year. I was being pretty ambitious. And then I got a couple pages in. I'm like, I feel like I would rather not write this as a 10-minute screenplay that I'll screw up because I didn't get sound right, or I didn't cast quite correctly, or I couldn't get a good location. That's the one thing is in a novel, you can just write that a character goes on a train that winds through the city and then sees concrete pillars rising in the background. In a screenplay, if you write that, you have to pay for it. Then you have to figure out how you're going to get a permit to film on a train, and then you have to figure all this other stuff out. So writing a novel was more freeing to me, personally, for what I wanted to achieve.
Right. Okay. Got another question here from Kristen. Do you have plans to write another novel / book in the future?
Yes, I do. I'm working right before this call. I was writing a very pivotal, intense scene in my next novel, what I hope to be my next novel. Um, yeah, I've already written a full draft. Well, I won't get too into it. Yes, I plan on writing more. I am going to write more. And hopefully I'll be sending some to you, Lucy, my agent in the call in the next couple months or so.
Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna ask probably my last
Okay.
question here.
Maybe I should have said that in an email instead of on a full-on Zoom call.
I'm gonna ask my last question here. If anybody else has any final comments or questions, feel free to type it in the chat here. But okay, so that's how has working in a bookstore shaped who you are as a reader and a writer?
That's a great question. I was hoping someone would ask about that because, I mean, I was talking to Juno about this earlier, but we're birds of a feather. We're both booksellers. And bookselling is kind of like, it's a weird profession in that there's like a big sense of camaraderie, huh? Like
Absolutely, yeah.
a bookseller in Canada and a bookseller in Thailand, if they can have a conversation, they'll have a lot to talk about, I'm sure.
Mhm.
I actually started working at a bookstore right around the time I started working on Satellite Love. And one of the big things that I learned at a bookstore was to be open to all sorts of different reads and and the different customers too. You get a really weird, we call them irregular regulars at the store. Some of the weirder people who come into the bookstore and maybe make your day more interesting or worse sometimes. But I definitely, just by working at a bookstore, read a lot more widely. I have great coworkers who had really fascinating tastes. Thanks, Marta. Marta's a coworker. She works also at the same store I do. Yeah, I know. I read more widely as a result. I saw a lot more reads, what was going on, and I feel like I just had a better understanding of fiction and people as a whole. What is this good? Would you say the fact that your dad glued glow in the dark stars above your bed when you were little influenced Satellite Love? Thank you, Will Ferguson. Yes, I was thinking. Do you want me to read that question out again?
No.
All right. So someone named Will Ferguson.
Who's that? I wonder. Who's that guy?
I'm not sure. The name rings a bell. I know there's is a Giller Prize winning acclaimed Canadian novelist, Will Ferguson. I'm not sure. I could be wrong.
Ring a bell, actually. That prize. The Giller.
Anyway, some guy named Will Ferguson with the same last name as me, who's also maybe my dad, said. All right, I'm just going to tell the story that his question's asking.
Okay.
Yeah, this was a couple. My dad called me up a couple months ago to say this. We didn't even make the connection until now, but he called me to say. So I grew up in Calgary and I moved to Vancouver. My family still lives in Calgary, and he called me to say, I was, hey, Genki or whatever, I was cleaning out your room, and above, as he was cleaning my room, I guess, or it's used as his office now, I guess, he was cleaning it out, sorting boxes or whatever, and then he stopped for a moment and kind of took a survey. And on the ceiling room, there's a bunch of these little glow in the dark stars that he had put on the I was going through my space, let's say. So it was like a weird chill went through his body. He goes, of course, like you write a book about satellites and staring into space. And I would have spent every single night when I was like 8, 9, 10, 12 years old, lying in bed, staring at these little glow in the dark stars, and probably deeply, deeply embedded into my subconscious. And then 10 years later, I write a book about a girl who stares into stars. So to answer that question, yes, I would say the fact that my dad glued glow in the dark stars above my bed when I was little influenced Satellite Love.
That's a great question.
You know what? You asked a question a while ago. What was it? Oh, like what memories from my childhood influenced that? Yeah. When I finished answering that question, I was like, oh, I should have mentioned the stars. I should have mentioned the glow in the dark stars. Now I got the chance.
He was probably thinking that too when you answered that question and left.
He was probably thinking, where's my credit? Damn it. Say the line. Yeah. Hey, Dad.
All right. Okay. If nobody has any more questions, I think maybe we'll wrap things up then. Genki, thank you so much for
Oh,
writing this book.
Christina.
Oh,
First of all, thank you.
I have
Christina
a question.
Michaela has the question.
Okay. Okay.
Well, let's give her time to
Yeah.
type so she's not panicking.
Yeah. Exactly.
5, 4, 3.
5, 4.
You're a fast typer. Oh my God.
You can
Wondering
ask
what books
another
I've been
question while
enjoying
he's in.
lately. Yeah. Wondering what books I've been enjoying lately. Oh my God. So much. There's so many good books in the world, which is what makes it so much more of an honor that people would mind. Lately I've been enjoying. I'm blanking. What am I reading? I'm reading Underground right now, which is a collection of survivors recounts from like the sarin gas attacks in Tokyo, 1999. That's a brutal read. Really brutal. For those who don't know, in 96, I guess, there was a new age Buddhist Christian cult staged a gas attack on the Tokyo subway, which killed a handful of people but injured hundreds with permanent effects. So I'm reading that. That's very harsh, very difficult. Local authors I'm enjoying. I'm liking Memory Collectors by Kim Neville. I think her book came out a couple weeks after mine. She's also Canadian. She's a Vancouverite. And it's about a woman who can sense the memories people leave behind on lost objects, which I thought was great because it's kind of similar vibe to Satellite Love. And then what else? Let me look at this shelf. This really messy, awful bookshelf. I want to name one more. Let's say Olga Tokarczuk is the latest Nobel Prize, or she won the Nobel a couple years back. She's like this. Oh, thank you. Look at that. I have an assistant. Olga Tokarczuk. She's a dreadlocked Polish hippie environmentalist, and she writes really phenomenal fiction. So, yeah, Lucy knows what's up. She's so good. And read Olga Tokarczuk. Not enough people are reading her, and actually, lots of people are reading her, but not all 7 billion people on this planet are reading her. So, not enough people are reading her. So, there's my answer.
That's a good sell.
Thanks, thanks, Christina. Hope I didn't panic you. The countdown.
Well, kind of a false alarm, because there's one question I always like to ask writers in interviews, and especially young writers. I always like to ask, what would you like to tell other young writers that are either starting out, writing their first novels, or trying to get their first novels published? What kind of advice would you like to give them?
Be very ignorant and stubborn. As in, maybe that only applies to some writers. As in, when you're writing your first draft, sorry, let me rephrase that. Be very ignorant, be very stubborn, and just get it done. Because when you're writing your first draft, and this feeling never goes away, I think. I've written writing this one too, I feel the same way. When you're writing your first draft, you feel, especially around the midway point, like, what? This is the most terrible, awful, pointless novel ever written. What am I thinking? You just need to ignore that voice and keep plugging ahead and try to stay true to your vision. Be very stubborn about it. Don't be stubborn to the people you end up working with in publishing. Be very gracious with them because they're doing their hardest. But with yourself, be ignorant to your own inner voice. Be stubborn and push through. And most importantly, just get a draft done. Your first draft will be pretty bad. First draft of Satellite Love is pretty bad. All first drafts are bad. But then you work on it. No one's ever published a first draft to my knowledge. You usually edit them. So there we go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks so much for your time, Genki, and thank you for writing this book.
Thank you, June, for hosting this, and thanks to you guys at Shelf Life for choosing it. Shelf Life Books is a vital and important cornerstone of Canadian indie book selling. I'm glad you guys are around, sticking with it.
Sticking with it, absolutely.
Sticking with it. That's what I meant to say.
And sticking it to Amazon, I guess.
Sticking it to the man. Yeah, sticking it to all the people who need sticking it to.
Yeah, exactly. They're gonna stick at some point. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much again, and thank you everybody for coming down. And if you haven't already read this book, you simply must because it's wonderful. And yeah, all right. I
Oh
guess
yeah,
I
do you
guess
still have postcards
yes, we do. Yeah,
oh,
so we still
Christina
have.
says
Oh, got a comment here.
Christina said she's halfway through and loving it. Thank you, Christina.
Yeah,
Hope I didn't spoil anything. I tried to be careful. But do you still have postcards and bookmarks they're handing out at your
we
beautiful
do.
store,
Yeah, we
Shelf
do.
Life Books Calgary?
We do still have some of those here at Shelf Life Books in Calgary at www.shelflifebooks.ca. If you do buy a book from us here, we will include one of these beautiful custom postcards in the book as well as bookmarks. So that sounds like pretty exciting. So,
That sound if I was in Calgary, I would run down right now and purchase Satellite Love and maybe Kim Neville's Memory Collectors and Olga Tkurzak from Shelf Life Books. That's maybe what I would do if I had some time off in Calgary.
yeah, yeah, exactly. All right. Okay. I guess we'll close this wonderful evening off. Thank you so much again, Genki. Thank you everybody for coming. We're gonna do this magical goodbye process, which is never gets better.
It's
It
always a
never
little
gets
bit of a thank you everyone.